cash and in kind with bags of rice, gari, beans, maize, sugar, milk, biscuits, drinks, detergent, toiletries, disinfectants, and so on to the front desk of City FM and City TV behind the Arabaka police station, and send your cash donations to the short code number *447*1073# on all networks. Call 0302-224-959 for further information. This Easter, let's make some sacrifices. Let's be compassionate. Let's open up our hearts, and let's make an orphan feel loved.
Take it all away and give it some kind of meaning.
Point of View is sponsored by Castlegate Estate Company Limited, the nation's #1 service plot specialist.
Good evening. This is the Point of View. We are on City TV every Monday and Wednesday at 9 p.m. On this show, we bring you the right guests. We ask them relevant questions, and generally we get to some real insights. But tonight's show is a special show. It's an editorial on possibly the biggest story this week. The Vice President, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, has been addressing a town hall meeting together with 9 other members of the economic management team on the state of the Ghanaian economy. So, because I can't interview myself, I'm going to do something very interesting tonight. I'm going to bring you my views on some of the key things the Vice President said this afternoon during the town hall meeting. But I'll tell you how I'm going to go about it when we come back. Now, while that is going on, we'll be happy to have you send in your comments because the show is interactive. Our hashtag is Point of View. We're also on Facebook at CityTVGH. And of course, there's a WhatsApp number that we'll be taking your feedback on. I'll be right back. So Dr. Bawumia mounted the stage around 10:55 a.m. today. Spoke for about an hour, addressing a lot of things, the economic fundamentals, where the economy was when this government took over. He also attacked a very controversial issue. He said earlier in the campaign, indeed, somewhere in 2014, that when the fundamentals are weak, the exchange rate will expose you. He tried to do some interesting explanation of that. And then he also spoke about the ports and the fact that they were not competitive. And then he discussed some proposals to modernize the economy. So right after that presentation and the question and answers, which took over 2 hours, Vivian Kailoko, who's the City News editor, interviewed me and my good friend Toma Imi here. He interviewed us for an hour and we dissected everything Dr. Bawumia said. So I'm going to show you this in 4 parts. First, you're going to see our views on the general program, the idea that it's a town hall meeting. People come and ask questions. Some were cheering, some were singing. Some even said that, well, they had a long list of questions, but because of Bawumia's delivery, they didn't have anything to ask. We discussed all of that. And the positioning of Bawumia as the leader or the arrowhead of government's economic policy team. We discussed all of that in the first part and also discuss the economic fundamentals and try to separate the structural from the macro. Later on, we talk about the much vaunted exchange rate and its effects. And then in the second part of the show, we discuss some of the policy initiatives he is proposing in terms of the power sector and also the slashing down of the valuation for imports. So in this first part, you're going to see Vivian Kailoko question myself and Toma. And I did this a few hours ago on what we made of Dr. Bawumia's delivery. Send your comments. We'll be reading them and putting them on the screen throughout the program.
What was the great takeaway for you, Bernard? Let's start with you.
Well, it depends on how you want to look at it. I think it was a very good program. Ghana's democracy is interesting, where you have ministers, cabinet ministers, and a vice president taking questions from ordinary people, it's really, really good. And it's a very important part of democracy. Whether it was the pressure of the politics or whether it was simply their own idea, it's a very good thing to have a vice president speak for an hour, try to explain his economic policy, have people from all walks of life come and ask questions. Although the crowd was partisan, I think the significance of this should not be lost on us. And I think we should encourage many more of such things. Because the more open you are, the more accessible it gets and the more people get informed. So I think on that basis it was a very good program. Of course, because the practicality of inviting different people to ask questions, you needed people who represent various groups.
Yes.
So we will look at some of the questions they asked representing their groups. It was very interesting, the cheers accompanying some of these things. It's difficult to disengage partisan support from some of these programs, no matter how much you try. So you notice a place, if you got a standing ovation, they were singing and things, which tells you that a lot of the people there were partisan. So that would then mean that larger majority of Ghanaians need to ask themselves whether those who went there to ask questions represent their view.
Their views.
Okay. Don't forget that there were a lot of traders and importers in there. And I think the most significant announcement about the recalculation of the valuation for tariffs at the port was very significant. So that was why there was a lot of joy there. But I feel the last question the young lady asked at the end, where she said, "You've said a lot of things. How does this
reflect on
in our
the
pocket?"
ordinary
And he had to take the senior minister to come and explain again why higher growth is better for you. It tells you that ordinary people still have a lot of questions. And we need to technicalize economics, where we make it simple for people. And I think senior minister tried to do that at the end. And I feel that actually should have been where the meat of the discussion was.
That's right.
I feel his attempt to even portray the importance of how growth rate dropped from 14 in 2011 to 3.6 and how they've raised it back to 7.9 is important. And why he has to explain to ordinary people that that means you have more money in your pocket. Akoto had to come and talk about why free SHS is good for you. It tells you that for many people, the jargon, the deficit, primary balance, debt accumulation, fiscal rigidities, they don't mean anything.
That's right.
Okay, so it's double. On one hand, on the political side, he's responded to his opponents. He's plowed through a very murky issue of fundamentals are weak. The currency will expose you, the exchange rate will expose you. He's done some interesting sleight of hand there, which we'll come to later. So my point is there are two audiences. The politically aware, the opposition, and those who follow the economics have their side. But I think a lot of ordinary people who say beyond the macro stability, beyond the sloganeering, petrol prices have gone up. Importers have raised the price of the things they sell because a lot of things we buy are imported. So even though inflation is below 10, best in a long time, question is, you are going to reduce some of the things at the port. Will it translate into lower prices of food? So the government has to follow, and I'm sure, I don't want to go into recommendation. My point is that there are two streams here. For ordinary people, it will take a lot more of the transmission mechanism to work for some of the claims being made to make sense to them. But I think on the political side and for the people who followed these discussions, it was a brilliant presentation by the vice president. And even his critics will admit that he found a way of, in dire straits, still putting some big punches through. So we have to analyze it from those two perspectives. So those are my initial thoughts.
Okay, initial thoughts from Bernard. General thoughts from you, Toma, with regards to the breakdown in the issues, making it understandable for all of us, as we saw during the campaign period, from Dr. Bawumia.
Well, Vivian, unfortunately, macroeconomics is something that you can't break down for everybody, all right? But I think he's made a reasonable attempt to do it. And what impressed me the most is that, as an economist, I'm really confident that despite several things that this government has done, which I regard as economic populism or social populism, which has sometimes had me worried. Now, after today, I'm convinced that despite all that, which is natural with a political party and all that, at the end of the day, the core of the economic management is based on maintaining proper macroeconomic fundamentals. That is what still matters most. Put aside the free senior high school and the social interventions and things like that. I've been a bit critical. I've been thinking that in terms of social interventions, with the limited fiscal space this government has, been trying to bite off more than it can chew in order as a means of getting votes against the next election. But I think after listening to them today, I've become convinced that yes, they are doing these things, but they're not ready to sacrifice on the core macroeconomic fundamentals, which they and I know are essential for even populist policies to be sustainable. For even the populist policies to be sustainable. And it is giving me some level of relief.
Okay.
I mean, they know what they are doing.
Yeah. How useful, so that we are all on the same page, including our viewers, how useful are these fundamentals for us in getting the economy on the right level, so that, like they'll say, it relates into our pockets, our living, etc.?
Okay. First of all, one is this. You cannot continue increasing how much you are owing indefinitely and get used to living above your means consistently without at the time looking at how you are going to begin to pay down your debts, or at least adjust your lifestyle to the cloth you have. All right. And that is where what we call the economic jargon of primary balance comes in. But basically what it means is that if you take out what we're spending on our debt, we are not spending more than what we are making, which is number one. Now, I mean, I think your viewers should put themselves just in their own households. You cannot continue spending more than your salary. All right? You can't go to the bank. You go to the bank and take a consumer loan and add it to your salary and spend that. Then the next day you go to Uncle Joe and borrow some money, and the next month you go to your village society, and every month you are borrowing more money. It's just rising. It's not sustainable. All right, and at least the fact that this government has shown that they are paying close attention to that, what they described as the primary surplus. All right, the fact that they are closely watching that gives me some confidence, because, to be honest, it was the failure of the previous government to watch that between late 2012 and late 2014 that actually is the foundation of the economic problems that Ghana has today.
Right.
I mean, in 2013, for example, we increased our public debt by 43% in just 1 year. Now, I mean, people who are not economic will not really understand this, but the fact was that the previous government, at a certain point in their tenure, not the entire tenure, but at a certain point, they lost control of how to borrow money in order to achieve things. Nobody said they borrowed the money and spent. I mean, the former President Mama's Green Book shows that the money was used for infrastructure. Yeah, but the fact that, look, again, let me refer to like a household. If you go and borrow 3 times your salary and use the money to change your chairs, your TV, your fridge and everything, your family is very, very, very comfortable. The time will come that even though your family is living in that comfort for the things you have bought with the money you have borrowed, because you are paying back more than you can afford, while they are living in comfort, they won't have food to eat. That is, I think, the simplest analogy I can draw. All right? And I think I'm happy that this government at least has learnt that lesson and is making sure they're not making the same mistake again.
Right.
It's very easy to make it, Vivian. It's very easy to make it because, look, nowadays when you can go to commercial capital markets, you can borrow for 30 years and 15 years. It's tempting for a politician to go and borrow money for, say, 15, 20 years, use it to sort out things that will make the voters happy now. And look at it, after all, when that payment is going to fall due, it's going to be somebody else's problem. It's not my problem. Look, all the first Eurobond adventure we went on was under President Kufuor. It was President Mahama that had to cope with the repayments. All the Eurobonds that President Mahama has issued, it's somebody else who's going to have to cope with them. All the ones being taken now by the President Kufuor, it's somebody else's problem. So it's very tempting to just do that and take the easy way out, all right? But at least when you look at the way, from today's presentation, you can see that the government is keeping a close eye on even leaving such problems for the future. Right. They are being careful not to go through what we went through a few years ago, and leaving a bad legacy for the future.
Okay.
So that gives me some level of comfort.
Right. So, Bernard, one of the key issues Dr. Bawumia spoke about was, so let's start now looking at the issues, the main one, which Toma has triggered, debt management and the issue to do with the loans, etc. Now, from his explanation or from figures we have, if you look at the accumulation over the period since they've been in office, it's much lower than we saw with the NDC during, let's say, the 2-year period. But from what the other figures available to you and from what we are seeing, are you happy with the level of how they've been able to deal with the issue of debt and borrowing?
Thank you. So, it's very important to decide whether you are going to compare NDC to MPP or whether you are going to compare what the government is doing with where the economy has to be. If you compare MPP to NDC, it's very clear that in managing the fundamentals, MPP has done better. That's the macro fundamentals. If you want to look at structural fundamentals, the jury is still out in terms of whether the economy has really diversified or not. And I think Bawumia himself admitted this. So we need to distinguish between the macro fundamentals that we regularly talk about, inflation, debt accumulation, GDP growth, primary balance, versus structural issues like, for example, import-export dependency, control of the economy, the sectoral differences in terms of agric, industry versus services. So that's point one. Now, if you look at debt accumulation between NDC and MPP, as Thomas said very clearly, two things have happened. Don't forget we rebase GDP.
That's right.
So in rebasing GDP, it gives you a larger room to borrow. So your debt to GDP ratio, which really for me is not a very useful way of assessing your debt sustainability, comes down. It's below 60%. Under Tekba, it got to 70.
That's right.
Debt to GDP ratio is deceptive because GDP is everything you produce in an economy. So if 58% of your GDP is your debt, you may say, well, it's not that bad. What you probably want to look at is export to GDP or tax. So export to debt to export or debt to tax revenues. Do you get me? So if you look at your export, your net exports, how much you're getting in through your exportation, and you compare that to your debt or how much tax revenue you're raising, then that becomes more meaningful. So I'm saying that if you look at the basic debt to GDP, this is far better. Indeed. And the other thing you need to also look at is some technical ways in which Dr. Bawumia tried to be very clever. So he would say to you that, well, our primary balance is positive for 2 years, okay, which is true. But he doesn't add, primary balance is just taxes versus expenditure.
That's right.
You don't add debt services. So you need to add debt services. That presents a more real picture. So that's issue one. If you did that way, it will present a different picture. Issue number two, rate of debt accumulation is lower. For the, he says 2018 and 2017 is the lowest in the past decade. Again, are you adding the banking sector debts? Because if you took the banking sector out, your debt accumulation is for 2018 is around 12%. But if you add the banking sector new debts, that's around 20%.
That's
okay.
right.
So statistics can be used to achieve a lot of things. So we need to be more nuanced in looking at what is good for the economy overall. So what we need to do is to say, okay, let's compare how much debt we've accumulated to our ability to pay. in terms of our tax revenue, for example, 2018, we didn't meet our target. All right?
Yes,
So yes, what our government done? They've reduced expenditure so we don't have a deficit. But the truth is that we can't keep reducing expenditure. We're getting to an election year. So the problems with our tax revenue accumulation has to be addressed. So even though you can, for a year, squeeze yourself and not increase as much expenditure, enough a nice number to say you have a primary balance which is positive, that's not a long-term issue. That's what I'm saying. Now if we just compare NDC MPP, macro fundamentals are better. But where the economy has gotten to, we need structural change. All right? Now, then you ask yourself, on the basis of the policies we've implemented in 2 years, can 2 years be enough for structural change? That's a different question. No wonder in listing the things he was doing, he said, I'm doing stable macroeconomy, inclusive transformation for the poor. And then he talks about formalization through technology and diversification, ease of doing business, reforms. These points are now going to the issue of structure.
That's right.
And on structure, the seeds have been sown, but the change is not being seen. Okay? I give you an example. I interviewed a Greek minister, and he spoke about the effect of planting for food and jobs, tree crops. Yes, it's doing well. Food prices haven't really responded the way they should. Okay? That's just one example. So my point is, the larger economic challenges we face, we have not addressed them. But this government has shown a better management of the macroeconomy for now. Again, if you compare somebody's 4 years, somebody's 2 years, it's not necessarily fair. Why? Because Mahama had 4 years, which included an election year. You've done 2 years and a few months, and we haven't entered the election year yet. So if you say the macro is, so I'm saying even for comparing 2 years to 4 years, it's not a very good exercise.
Very good,
That's why I said that it will not be right for him to just come and respond to NDC. Because that's what NDC wants. Because trust me, tomorrow they'll also do a press conference and they'll tell you that we are better. But we need, as civil society, as media, to come up with what the standard is. And say, based on where we want to go, based on the unemployment we face, based on the challenges we face with trade and all these things, based on the time series of our cedi depreciation, since records started, the continual depreciation, are these policies going to bring the relief for Ghanaians? That's how we should look at it. Do you get my point?
That's
so
right.
I'm trying to answer the question in communication by saying that it's easy to do NDC MPP because that you score political points and people will say you've done better. But trust me, if we don't make sure that the fiscal rule and the fiscal council works, 2021 we may go back. Do you get my point? So it's a very nuanced conversation which requires a lot of insight about where the economy ought to be in comparison with its neighbors, Kenya, Senegal, Nigeria. That's when you can really tell whether things have improved. But the politicians are very key to compare records. And look at how all these traders were falling over themselves because they've got a reduced, they have a reprieve at the port.
Yes.
Somebody even said, I came with a whole list of questions, but I have no question to ask you. Seriously? Of all the issues facing people in Ghana, because of a 1 hour presentation, you have no question to ask? Obviously, that's political. It's partisan. And we don't need that. We need to improve. But it will not change because, trust me, a lot of people look at these things through partisan lenses. And if you try to even be objective to them, they will cloud out what you are saying because it doesn't support the reality they've decided to believe. So it's very difficult to be objective in an environment like this. All right. Having said all of this, I think one quick other positive I liked was it was good to see two things, and this is from more the optics version. How clearly Dr. Bawumia is respected by the economic management team. He's clearly seen as the face of our economic management. Number two, there was no dissonance in the views expressed by the various ministers. And I say this to say that, look, we've had governments where the vice presidents on a different trajectory from maybe, say, finance minister. You don't see them together really endorsing each other's positions necessarily. Somebody's economic advisor, somebody's vice president, somebody is head of economic management team, another person is minister of finance, and they are doing separate things. So the optics of having the senior minister say that Bawumia's leadership has brought us here is very significant. And these things are very qualitative but very important So you will not expect them to go and put up a policy that will go against what they've just told you. Because Agriculture Minister is there, Trade Minister is there, Vice President is there, Senior Minister is there. Everybody who matters in the economy is there. So this government has learned some things from dysfunction of teams. And they put up a very good showing. But it is only time that will prove if the change that they are claiming they've brought is actually lasting.
Okay. So let's look at now some of the issues raised. Let's come to the issue of the city. And if we can pick what the Vice President said about the city, then we look at, dissect that statement from him on the city. Whilst we are waiting for that video. So basically, okay, so let's take the video until it's ready.
That I stated in 2014 that if the fundamentals are weak, the exchange rate will expose you. That was true then. That was true then, and it is true now. It is 100% correct. So if the fundamentals are weak, the exchange rate will expose you. But it is warped logic to jump from that to a conclusion that if there is depreciation in your currency, then the fundamentals must be weak. Do you understand the logic? It is very warped logic. If the fundamentals are weak, the exchange rate will expose you. But if the exchange rate moves, you cannot jump to that conclusion that the fundamentals are weak. That defies logic. That defies logic. There could be other external factors causing the exchange rate depreciation. For example, if I tell you that if your leg is broken, you are going to be unable to walk, then I'm somewhere and somebody comes to tell me, this person is unable to walk. Can I just conclude that their leg must be broken? There can be other reasons why you are unable to walk. But the NDC logic will insist, in the face of contrary evidence, that since you cannot walk, then it must mean your leg must be broken. In 2014, the exchange rate depreciated by 31.3%. The fiscal deficit was 10.1% of GDP. The public debt rose to 70.2% of GDP. Inflation rose to 17%. And GDP growth had declined from 7.3% to 4%. In other words, the economic fundamentals had weakened significantly, and therefore the depreciation was easily explainable. It was not caused by dwarfs or high-rise buildings, as we were told. The exchange rate in 2014 had exposed the weak economic fundamentals. And if you look at the table on the screen, it gives you the fundamentals as we have it in 2014, and you look at them in 2018. Every single one of them, real GDP growth, inflation, the fiscal balance, wage bill to GDP, gross debt, interest rates, and all of that, current account, all the fundamentals, you will see we were in a much weaker position in 2014 compared to 2018. So, ladies and gentlemen, how has the city performed recently? At the end of December 2017, the city had cumulatively depreciated by 4.9% compared to 9.6% in 2016. And this was the city's best performance since 2011. At the end of 2017, we had the best performance of the city since 2011. The city, however, depreciated by 8.4% in 2018, largely on account of the emerging market pressures and U.S. interest rate increases. the data, ladies and gentlemen, on the annual rate of depreciation of the cedi in recent years, and you will see this graph here, it's like night and day. The data on the annual rate of depreciation of the cedi in recent years shows that the worst performance so far under the MP.
So that's Dr. Bawumia's session on the performance of the cedi. Now, a very catchy phrase that he was attributed with over the period is, if the fundamentals are weak, it will expose you, with the issue about the currency. But this time round, guys, he says, no, it's not necessarily the case. It could be something else.
I'm not buying that. I think that I'm not buying. I think that, I mean, look, something can sound nice, logic on a rally or in terms of an argument, but I disagree completely with him. You see, and it's not an NDC issue. This is what I don't like about politicians. Is it only NDC people who use the cedi? Why is he making it an NDC logic? So when people say, why? When the currency depreciated 8.9% in 2018, was it only NDC people who were using it? So I feel that, number one, situating it as an NDC issue is not fair, because it's not only NDC who have said the currency is depreciating. He is the one who introduced the idea that if the fundamentals are weak, the exchange rate will expose you. Why does he separate exchange rate from depreciation? Isn't depreciation of the exchange rate? Okay, so he's saying that, okay, well, if you have depreciation, then you can't say the fundamentals are weak. That's true in terms of logic, but that's not what we are saying.
That's right.
Okay, the reasons given for the recent depreciation, even post-2019, I find it very interesting. So you're saying, for example, there was external issues. Is this the first time we've had external issues? Under Muhammad, didn't we have external issues? Is this the first time US has cut their interest rates? You said the IMF required you to have a specific
amount of reserves.
Please. And we're even ending the IMF program. So what about the person who was in the middle of an IMF program? I think that what would have been better for him to do is to separate the structural fundamentals from the macro fundamentals, because we know that since records started, the cedi has been losing value, even through redenomination.
But can I add something to what you say right now? If you want to talk about fundamentals, let's face it, his government, Bawumia's government, inherited, not created, inherited a trade surplus from his predecessors, who is accusing about having weak economic fundamentals. Ghana started having a trade surplus in the last quarter of the tenure of the Mahama administration. 2016, last quarter. That's when we started getting trade surplus. That was when we started getting more from exports than we are spending on imports. This current government inherited that situation. So, in fact, they inherited a better economic fundamentals than what their predecessors had. You understand? So if you are talking about so I don't see how he can be arguing that his fundamentals are so good and the previous guys were so bad. The previous guys gave him something to stand on, and yet we're still having this silly depreciation.
We need to just agree that, you see, the trade surplus is not enough. So generally, when you take the fundamentals under MPP, overall, the structural fundamentals were stronger within the period they are being in power than NDC. But the point about trade surplus is important. But I need to do something about trade surplus. So you see, the trade surplus, there are different components. Okay, so there's merchandise import and exports. There's service import and exports, and then there's investment.
Yeah, the capital and financial account. So that's where the problem is coming from.
So you can have a positive trade surplus, and I think that's where you should have gone to say, you know what, trade surplus was positive, but we are still a net importer of services. We are still losing money in terms of repatriation of investments here.
That's where the problem
then
is coming from. Then
you say that, so that has not, the trade surplus is not a full picture of the fundamentals. So I'm saying that to turn this around and say NDC is saying this, it's easy. Of course, NDC, don't forget President Mahama, when the currency got to 4, he tweeted and says fundamentals how. So Dr. Mahama have their own issue they discuss. But I'm saying that our leaders should not use the convenience of having a better argument against their opponent and mistake that for the reality on the ground. Okay? Because as we sit here, fuel prices have gone up, and when you read all the reports, it's because of depreciation. In fact, if you go into the budget I'm holding here, Even our debt servicing went up because of the depreciation, because of the exchange rate depreciation. Okay, so the amount of money you spend to pay your debt because the currency is going down. So my point is that we should. I feel that again the issue should be properly calibrated. He said, and he centralized and brought into the discussion the preeminence of the exchange rate. So he can't eat his cake and have it.
Of course.
No matter how eloquent he sounds and no matter how people applaud it, he needs to tell us why. And then the reasons he's adducing for this recent fall of the currency, some can dispute those reasons and say that structurally you haven't done the work to change the structure.
And that is where the problem is. That is where the problem is, Bernard. Look, what happened to us? What happened to us since second half of last year up to now?
Yes.
Let me apportion blame. It starts with the Kufuor government, continues with the Mills government, continues with the Mama government, continues into the Akufo-Addo government. All four administrations are equally culpable for the most recent fall of the cedi. On the basis that since 2007, under Akufo time, we opened our sovereign, our domestic debt securities market to foreign investors. Since then, Ghana has been living on credit. We take in foreigners bring in dollars, change them into cedis, invest in cedi debt bonds. All right. We now classify them as domestic debt. We deceive ourselves that these are domestic debt. It's self-deception. And we now use the dollars for what we want to use them for. And since then, we've had a net inflow of dollars. So we have been living above our means in terms of foreign exchange.
Yeah.
It was only last year when the Federal Reserve in America started doing monetary tightening and interest rates started going up there, that now that thing now reversed into a net outflow. People who had given us dollars on credit were simply taking their money back. And the result was the crash of the cedi. So you can't blame that on any particular principle. There are four governments who are culpable. And interestingly, two of them are NDC administrations, two are MPP administrations. So let's say it's 2-2 a draw.
Yeah, so I feel that the exchange rate question has not been properly addressed.
Yeah.
It wasn't properly addressed. I don't think it was. And the other point that makes it worrying is that the most important policy announcement he made today appears to fly in the face of two things. The president has already said to the finance minister that I want you to investigate the latest cause of the cedi depreciation. That means that the cause is not known. If the cause is not known, why are you telling us that it was whatever? It means you know already, so why are you setting up a committee? Because finance minister said to parliament that the president has told him to set up a bipartisan committee to investigate the latest fall. Yet you are telling me that the IMF program,
saying that
in the last month you're supposed to have a certain amount of reserves, and therefore it stymied your ability to intervene in the market. Do you get my point? Which means that your intervention was also a short-term intervention. You are not dealing with the long-term issue. So I'm saying at that point itself, so trying to explain...
If your fundamentals are strong, would you need to intervene in the market?
So trying to explain the cause of the recent depreciation as against what the president purportedly being angry about the depreciation, again, that's point one. Then point two, you've now said you are going to do a major announcement about the ports. And you've said the valuation of imports you are going to reduce by 50% and then forecast by 30%. This is an import-dependent economy. I can show you what we spend our money importing. And we have those things here. Okay? From paper to machines to fake hair. Look, import data, transportation, 42% cars. You're going to reduce. So the two things. He tried to explain that by saying, well, our port is not competitive. And I agree with the work they did.
That's right.
Togo port is more competitive. Other ports are more competitive. Not a problem. But have you thought about the consequence of your policy response for your long-term issue of import substitution, for example? Have you thought about that? So again, see, when politics and economics clash and you have to appease people versus do things that augur well for you in the long term, you can't cheat. You can't cheat nature.
Right.
So the importers are clapping for you today They say, oh, Mr. President, you have done well, you are listening government and everything else. But we also know that our appetite for imports and the import cabals have sabotaged our value addition efforts. And our local economic control efforts. Even when MTN went on the stock exchange, how many Ghanaians were able to buy the shares they put out? The people who live in this economy, who invest their money here, who have money here, are not many. That's why he explained to you that a lot of our so-called local borrowing is still foreign.
Yes. Yeah.
So you can't deal with that if you are going to keep appeasing specific groups. And I agree that, yes, you did some work on the competitiveness of the port. But was this the best solution? And to announce it that it takes place in immediate effect? Have the customs been informed already? Now, the Guta president is saying, we want to know the modalities.
Yes.
You're putting politics in the thing. You get me? So what you're doing is, you take 2 steps forward, you take 1 step back. Vivian, if you live long enough, 2022, you will invite us to come and talk about the city depreciation again. Because the seeds you sow for structural transformation, you've not allowed them to yield fruit.
Yes.
And then every now and again, first say you are removing nuisance taxes. Then you come back and say you are going to reduce this at the port. So you are not going to change it, because even though you are not going to overspend because elections are coming, you are going to do some policies that will appease people politically. And when you do that, you don't change structure.
Yes.
So for me, I don't buy his argument.
Effectively, what is
Living among your peers in a serene gated community with tarred roads, drains, electricity, piped water supply and 24-hour security can be so relieving. That is the experience you will enjoy when you reserve the Castle Residency plots located near Prampram Beach and Katamanso near Adenta Barrier. Just pay up to 60% deposit and start construction to start enjoying Prampram Beach and Airport City life. You can start with any deposit. We give you a whopping 10% discount if you make an outright payment. The Castle Residency plots are managed by Castlegate Estate Ghana Limited. Locate our offices at Katamanso Estate site off the Adenta Barrier Dodua Road or Prampram Beach Road next to Oasis International School, or contact us on 0545 559928, our website on www.castlegateestate.com.gh, or email us at info@castlegateestate.com.gh. The Castle Residency Plots. We make home ownership easier.
City TV is live. City TV is a free-to-air digital channel. On a digital TV, please press menu on your remote control and run a news search on your TV. Take note that without an antenna, you cannot access City TV on your television. City TV can be accessed on a multi-TV digibox. Tune into City TV and experience your world. City TV, it's your world.
He says bad power deals costing us issues with transmission grid co. Then the Millennium Challenge Compact expected to give us some amount of money to help us with our challenges. But he believes the way to go is domestic gas. And that we need the infrastructure and the cash to make it happen. Is that the way to go?
For me, I always say this, and I sound like a broken record. Do you know that in 2015 March, President Mahama ordered that this tie-in between east to west and west to east be done before end of 2016.
That's right.
He made that announcement. So why are we now talking about a tie-in today?
Again.
Okay, he announced, and so this idea that we should be able to move gas from both sides. Of course, once you do atomic gas, you should know that if all your power plants are in the enclave, you need to move gas from that side. And we've known this is 2015. Why haven't you been able to do it? From NDC, they couldn't finish. I was interviewing, I think, Ogbami, who was then the Ghana Gas PRO, said to me, they couldn't do it because they had to deal with tariff issues. And because they couldn't agree on the tariff, they were not able to finish. And NPP have been in power for 2 years. Why haven't they done it? Look at that. From 2015, we are in 2019. And we are still talking about tie-in. Because we know the Nigerians have never given us the gas at the pressure we want.
Yes.
Okay.
And we've also had issues with paying them.
So this is it. And every year when the shoe changes, the opposition says you don't have money to pay. The government says it's technical. Okay, let's assume it's technical. Is technical not part of competence? Why do we always say it's like the president said their own questions? Well, the NDC says you don't have money to pay for the power, so there's doom. So the government said no, it's not that we don't have money. It's technical problem. Why? Is competence only a financial issue? Is it also a technical issue? Let's raise the bar. To be fair, this current doomsday is not as protracted. And the idea Bawumia speaks about makes sense in the long run if they can see it through. Because gas is cheaper than the other sources of powering your thermal plants. Don't forget that 60% of our power is now this mix of thermal things, and then now 40% is renewables, which itself is a different conversation. For the past 3 or 4 months, again, the IES have shown us that we are overdrafting our hydro. So from November, December, January, February into March, over 50% of the power we share to Ghanaians is from the hydro. It means there's something going on with the thermal that is beyond simply this recent issue of tie-in.
That's right.
Okay? No wonder then Bawumia asked him, do you have a timetable? He says, I know when to. So my point is that yes, in 12 days they could fix it. But will we have enough money to buy the gas? That's the question. And Muhammad, 2 years was a long time. Dumso almost defined his administration. If the things he's spoken about, they don't see through and do them, we'll have Dumso again. If you speak to people like Tazan, they will tell you the things you need to change to prevent Dumso are hard things. And we have to see them through. So for me, we wait. You know, at the end of the season, I say, oh, we pray that after this is done, we are not going to have, what do you call it? the power crisis will be over. It's like some of the factors are beyond our control.
That's right.
Okay? And the other point is we had a lot of noise about Mary and car power. Why aren't they telling us the specific things they changed about those deals and how that's making it cheaper for us to produce power? So that tariffs will come down. Is it that the deals were too rigid? There was a whole delegation that went to Dubai.
Them, yes.
What did they do?
Yes.
Okay? Again, to what extent are they varying our power mix? It's not just on the thermal side between gas versus HFO and crude or whatever you call it. Hydro. And then you have the others, like solar. Where is the mix? The renewables are reducing. Why? Again, the long-term solutions are harder, but posterity will judge you fairer. Okay? So that one, I won't say much. We'll wait to see. 12 days is only 13th April or 14th April. We'll see whether the power cuts will go.
Or we reduce or be the same thing.
Now, the thing about this gas thing is this. Sankofa is the game changer. Do you guys remember when the previous government was entering this deal about the Sankofa thing, where there were World Bank guarantees, and the current government, at that time opposition, said it was too expensive and that and that and that? Let me tell you what's going on here. Sankofa is unlike the other two oil fields. Sankofa is actually a gas field that has associated oil, unlike Jubilee and TEN, which are oil fields that have associated gas. Sankofa is basically a gas field. It's got so much gas. That's why the vice president was saying that we have enough gas now for everything. Now, part of our problem now is infrastructure to process and transmit the gas. And I suspect that the incumbent government is finding it hard to own up to this being the problem on the basis that they were very, very critical about the deal that has made this gas available to us in the first place. When they were in opposition, they were playing politics.
Same politics issue.
They were playing politics with it. Remember, that time they were saying it's a bad deal. And it's that deal that's giving us all this gas right now. The gas we are now talking about that is enough to power up all our thermal plants. So I think that what has happened is that in the process of playing politics, we got stuck behind on putting the infrastructure needed to transmit the gas, because we're busy playing politics about the fact it was a bad deal in the first place. and now we are running.
And I was
behind
also
time.
surprised that the first question on power came from a journalist at the end of the program. I feel that the thrust of Dr. Bamian's presentation affected this because he was clearly interested in the CD, the macro fundamentals, and then the troubles at the port. And so his policy response was what led a lot of people to talk about the trade issues and the... So there wasn't a lot on the power sector.
Yes.
Partly because we also discussed it this week on radio and television. So it was Kweku Temeng from TV3 who now came in to talk about the... what do you call it? Is it TV3? I don't know where it went.
GH1.
Who came to now speak about the power. And then that was the first time Peter Amewu spoke. Because I'm surprised that for... I think, of course, the power crisis has been on and off. Okay? From November, December, it's not been that pronounced. It's become very bad in the past couple of weeks. So it's not really registered in people's minds. And I really hope that what the energy minister is saying is true. That in 2 weeks' time, things will be better. Because there's nothing that can spoil everything than power. Industrialization cannot take place without power. Things like 1D, 1F will be meaningless without power. Affordable, accessible. Again, the other thing is, I need to make a quick point. So, people say, oh, Ghana, our install capacity is 4,000. What's the available capacity? So there's install capacity 4,000. What's available? 2,000. Of that 2,000, how much can people pay for? Okay, so we always have to break things down from, and we like saying, oh, we've given people 10,000 seats. That's output. What's the outcome? How much has that increased production, and how much has that reduced price and made it available? So same for power. So power is not just install capacity. So move from install capacity to available capacity. And then move away from available capacity to how much is affordable. And that can be paid for to keep the business running. That's why the mix is important. You need a mix which has power that can be produced cheaper. Because in Ghana, we make people who use power for productive purposes pay more than people who use it to watch television in the house. Yeah. Because most people are poor. Right? So there are a lot of deep things we need to think about with our power sector. And my point is, if we don't start politics proofing, you know, that's why Osafo is a very important word, because of irreversibility. You need to politics proof certain policies. We decide in Parliament that power, this is where we are going for the next 10 years. Right. Whether it's NDC or MPP or CPP, this is it. When you come, do it this way. That's why the fiscal rule thing is important. Then we will say, okay, let's play politics with some other things. The ones that we don't know, new region, I don't get. But if you use politics to deal with things, because in some countries they see certain as national security. For example, the US. It's very rare for a US government to go against Israel. The extent of support for Israel may vary, but the policy is clear. Israel is the one we like because it's in our national security interest to support Israel. 2, our relationship with Europe. Look at yesterday. Trump met the EU NATO General Secretary, NATO. Yes. Trump has used a lot of bad rhetoric against NATO. But when they met in a room, US government has given more money to NATO this year than they gave last year, even though Trump has been criticizing NATO. And in fact, the NATO General Secretary is going to be part of a joint Senate hearing. Joint Senate, so the upper and the lower house are meeting this NATO General Secretary, just despite Trump's rhetoric. What does that mean? The US political establishment realizes that it is in their strategic national interest to have the Europeans as their allies on the military cooperation because of global geopolitics against Russia and China. So whatever happens, we can't be NATO's enemies. So even if Trump says they are freeloading, that doesn't change the fact that whether it's Republican or Democrat or independent, NATO is a strategic ally of the US government. Yeah. Why aren't we having strategic objectives for key sectors? Why must... Look, somebody can win elections and come and stop free SHS. Why don't we discuss things to a point where we agree as an elite that this is the way we want to go? This is what is destroying the country. Okay, so this thing about comparing political records is very, very deep because even in power, as he said, when you are in opposition, you see it one way. Look at now, the NDC, they have dumping over themselves. Doomsday is coming. Every 2 seconds, Doomsday is coming. We said it to Kamala Donko on TV. Why? Why don't we strategically agree on the power mix we want? Lock that in with a parliamentary policy, and then we play politics with the peripherals. Because if you don't have power, if you don't have proper power, you can't industrialize. You'll be poor forever. Whether you're NDC or MPP. That's right. Why can't we see it that way?
Okay. So let's move to our final issue because we're almost up for the imports or the freight forwarders and the importers. I think they are the biggest winners today. They get to have the benchmark value of all imports slashed by 50%, but that of vehicles 30%. We'll take that insert quickly and then we talk about that.
Port reforms. Our ports remain important national assets, and we must manage it to improve trade to the benefit of all Ghanaians. Government has devoted considerable energy over the last 2 years with different stakeholders, shippers, importers, exporters, freight forwarders, traders, spare part dealers, listening to their concerns. What was baffling to us was that even though the MPP government had not increased import duties, there were persistent complaints that duties at the ports were high. So government set up a ports review committee to review the competitiveness of Ghana's ports within the West African region. Here are some of the surprising findings. Here are some of the surprising findings. Except for Nigeria, the total marine charges and security fees charged at Tema for container handling far exceed those of our key competitors. In fact, there are 3 times the charges in Lomé and nearly twice the charges in Abidjan. No port in West Africa is charging the equivalent of the Ghana Maritime Security Fee of nearly $20,000 per vessel entering our ports. Import handling charges are higher in Tema than in any port in West Africa. While nearly 90% of containers that come to Tema are physically examined, they open them and staff them, examine and restaff them. 90% are physically examined. Only about 5% are subject to physical examination in any modern port. Physical examination is a major source of corruption at the ports. Data, however, because we wanted to find out all this physical examination, how much does it add to revenue? When we asked that question, it was Asemaba. Because how much? 90%.
Okay, so final thoughts on the ports, then we'll take a few messages from our listeners. Bernard, way to go with the ports?
So I've already said that the port issue raises questions about the import substitution thing. Mm-hmm. And I've also said that I understand the point Dr. Bamiyan makes about competitiveness of the ports. He gives some figures I can't dispute, where he says the volume of trade coming in through Togo is much higher than ours because the way we structured our tariffs is a disincentive for bringing goods through our port. Our port's not competitive. I can't argue with that.
Okay.
But I have a few questions for him. So, you've announced that Volkswagen is coming to assemble cars here. You've also announced that somebody else is coming to assemble cars. Who was the other one?
Nissan.
Nissan, yes.
So when Angela Merkel came, we said
Renault
Volkswagen.
To somewhere.
Renault to say they will come.
Yes.
Okay. If you reduce this valuation, which will lead to lower tariffs on imported cars, how competitive will the cars that we assemble here be? That's one question you should ask yourself. Because don't forget, we've seen Uhuru Kenyatta. When Macron visited France, they have a plant in Nairobi where Peugeot cars are assembled in Kenya by Kenyans.
Okay.
And they're supposed to use that to start a process of industrialization. Nigeria is also trying the same thing. South Africa has that as well. If Kantanka is producing cars here, so if you say you want to reduce the pressure on your currency and you want to set up plants here, if it's not competitive for them to assemble it here, they can't do it. So if you make it cheaper to keep importing cars, you may still assemble the car here, but people still want to buy
the cheaper one.
Don't forget that each time we interview these original equipment manufacturers, like Toyota, Nissan, and Co., who sort of import cars, they say that the cheap imports of second-hand cars is affecting the buying of quality cars.
Yes.
But you can also stretch that. So, don't forget, also, one came on the screen to say she's from one of these companies.
Japan Motors.
But where does this leave those policies? Did the discussion around assembling cars, as an example, take into consideration the fact that we would announce on a Wednesday that by Thursday we are reducing the value that we place on imported cars by 30%? Okay? So, I can't argue that we need a competitive port. Have we thought about the long-term implications of the decision we are taking? Okay? Again, when things get better at the ports and goods are cheaper for importers and traders, does that translate into the price of the finished product? You should ask yourself that question. Or whether some people who do the import and the trading, they siphon the profit, marry another wife, or build a bigger house. You need to find out. So
that
importers can come and say, we are happy you are listening, President, you are very good because there are many, they make a lot of noise, you fine. So I'm saying that I can't dispute the competitiveness point. But think about if you feel that, so we import vehicle spare parts or we import equipment to do 1D, 1F. Will the equipment be cheaper because of your policy? If it will be, then great.
Fine.
But if you can't guarantee that, you are making a few people who do import happy,
Okay.
and the rest of us will still pay more.
Okay.
So,
Thomas, 20 seconds.
In this case, I think I just agree with everything that Bernard says.
Okay.
I just have exactly the same opinion.
well, so that was, this was around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, me talking with Vivian Kai Loko, who's head of New South City, and my good friend Toma Emihire of the Gold Street Business. It's very interesting watching yourself. I hope I made sense. I decided to use that for the editorial because those were my fresh views after watching the whole thing live. If I left it a bit later, it would be a bit more reflective. So if you didn't agree with me and I couldn't put your message on the screen, you can join me tomorrow on radio because I'm going to be interviewing the finance minister to discuss more of this. But I hope you've enjoyed the angle we've brought to the conversation, and we hope you've loved our very first editorial type on Dr. Bawumia's town hall meeting. So that's all we have time for on The Point of View on City TV. Thank you for watching. My name is Bernard Avle, and goodbye.
Point of View is sponsored by Castlegate Estate Company Limited, the nation's #1 service plot specialist.